Hey, have you ever wondered how to select the right wine to pair with food? Well, since Thanksgiving's right around the corner, we're going to go ahead and explore what the best pairing for your Thanksgiving dinner is going to be. And we're going to look into some basics of wine on how to evaluate its ageability and its flavor profiles and how that's going to pair with food. Also, if you've ever wondered why there's different shapes to wine glasses and wine bottles, we're going to touch on that. Stay tuned. Hopefully you come out of it a little bit more educated on the other side and able to go ahead and explore and experiment within your wine journey a little bit more. Welcome to The Gentlemanly Things. I am Brian Lipstein, your host. This show isn't about how to be a gentleman, but it's about the art of living like one. And let's explore that one conversation at a time. Welcome back to The Gentlemanly Things. We've got another great conversation ahead of us here. Today, I wanted to jump back and revisit a topic we only kind of touched on in one episode so far. I want to get into exploring a little bit more basics around wine. And since we have Thanksgiving coming up this week, I figured what better way than to talk about wine and how we can pair it with the food that's going to be on our Thanksgiving tables. In the first wine episode, we had Bruce Phillips, and Bruce gave us a masterclass on the history of Napa and specifically the region in Oakville where Vine Hill Ranch sits. And we learned a lot of history, but we didn't really necessarily get into some of the basics. I wanted to cover that today and just kind of go back to a few of those things and bring you guys up to speed. If you aren't already educated in wine and you wanted to know more, this episode is going to be great for you. So when it comes to wine, a couple things to really keep in mind are, first of all, the varietal of grape that we're growing. And the varietal determines most often the name of the wine, but it depends on what part of the world you might be growing the grapes in and producing the wine. When we look at California, we definitely name the wine after the varietal, right? You'll hear California Cab. That's something you hear a lot about. California Pinot Noir, California Chardonnay. On a few places throughout California, you'll find Riesling and you'll find Sauv Blanc or Sauvignon Blanc. But if you were to go over to Europe and find those varietals in France per se, you would hear terms like Bordeaux or Burgundy or Loire Valley. And because in France, the wine is named for the place where it's grown and bottled and made, and not necessarily the grape, but each of those regions has their predominant grapes that they will grow because they work with the soil or the climate in that region for growing. The five main varietals of Bordeaux, you're going to find Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, which are the two primary varietals. And then you have three more secondary varietals. You have Cabernet Franc, you have Malbec, and you have Petit Verdot. When you move over to Burgundy, you're primarily going to find in the red varietals, Pinot Noir. And in the white varietals, you'll find Chardonnay. The white varietal that comes out of Bordeaux is typically Sauvignon Blanc. Just understanding these basics, right? Being able to read a wine label, understand what's in it and how it's going to pair with the food and what you're looking for when you evaluate that wine for that pairing. Regardless of where you're sourcing from, there's rules that exist in each country as to how they label the wines, how they classify them in terms of grades. You'll hear often Premier Cru, First Growth, things like that thrown around. And that's a rating or a classification system that exists that's different than where it's grown. I don't want to get that complicated today. I just wanted you to know that all that exists. Today, I really want to touch on the three classics of how you evaluate a wine. And that would be acidity of the wine, body of the wine, and tannin. And I want to talk about each one of those a little bit, and then I will give you some insight into how to pair that with the food on your Thanksgiving table. Let's talk about acidity first. And these three characteristics, acidity, body, and tannin, are how you really kind of evaluate the basics of any wine. And what you're looking for are the characteristics within the wine around those three characteristics. They're going to kind of be aligned with other characteristics you'll be looking for, but also it's going to tell you the structure of the wine or the ageability of the wine. If you've ever heard somebody talk about wine having structure, this is what they're describing. Before I keep going, I forgot one of the most important things, which was opening some wine to drink with you guys. And hopefully, if you want to hit pause and go grab your own bottle of wine to enjoy while you listen to this, I would encourage that. But I want to come back to a couple other subtle differences. And you may notice as you go through a store that bottles come in different shapes. And so if you look at these two bottles, they are distinctly different. And the reasoning or history behind that comes down to what's actually in the bottle and a couple of other things. But primarily, when we talk about Bordeaux, I mentioned those varietals in Bordeaux, mainly Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Those varietals really tend to produce a lot more sediment when the wine settles and ages. The Bordeaux bottle was developed with straight sides and a higher shoulder. And the history behind that, why it was developed this way, was really to be able to catch the sediment that will develop inside the bottle. And so as you pour the wine out, this sharper shoulder will catch some of that sediment, keeping it from getting into the glass. You definitely don't want sediment in your glass. It's going to make the wine really gritty. And we'll talk about what the sediment really is as we get into discussing some of those three elements I was talking about earlier. This bottle was more commonly known as a Burgundy bottle. And the main varietals in Burgundy are Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, as I mentioned earlier. Because those varietals don't really produce a lot of sediment, you didn't need that high shoulder. And really, this bottle was easier for a glass blower to blow the shape of. So Burgundy didn't need the high shoulder. There's less sediment and easier and less expensive to produce this shape for the bottle. Over time, each of these shapes became synonymous with the region or the type of grape that was grown. And so you'll often find that Pinot Noir or Chardonnay are going to come in this type of bottle, and you'll get Cabernet or Merlot most often in a bottle that's got the higher, straighter sides with the high shoulders. So when you're looking at the bottle, that alone will give you some insight into what's in the glass or what's inside that bottle. Now, when it comes to glassware, we also have distinct shapes for glassware. So if you look at this shape, again, a bowl with higher, straighter sides versus a little bit of a wider, fatter bowl here with a little bit of a lower edge to it. So the wider bowl, often used more for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay again, and the high sides with the not quite as wide bowl, often used for Cabernet or Merlot. So each of these shapes is designed to concentrate the flavor and the smell of the wine, because part of what we're actually tasting is based off of the smell. So as we pour the wine and we drink it, and that smell aroma comes up through the glass, you actually will get different flavors out of the wine. So each one specifically designed for the varietal that you're tasting. Today, I wanted to go ahead and open a Pinot Noir. So what I brought up was Dunham, which is a California estate in Carneros, but they do have vineyards spread throughout the entire Napa-Sonoma region up into the Russian River. And each of their wines is a single vineyard wine that is site-specific to what they're trying to produce. Over the last couple years, they've really grown and expanded. One of the neat things about Dunham is the art collection that exists on their Carneros estate. And it's one of our favorite places to visit. When we go out to California, we always visit, even though we've had the wines over and over and over again, and I have a huge collection of them. We want to make sure that we go see what kind of new art has come into the collection there. So give me a second. Let me get this open. And as I'm opening this, let's talk a little bit more about that acid and body and tannin. I was talking about acid in the wine. With acid, you really have three descriptors for acid, either high acid, medium acid, or low acid. And acid in the wine starts to develop. It's really natural to the grapes, but the more sugar content that exists in the grapes, so the riper the grapes get, the less the acid tends to come through. So you'll find higher acid in your cooler climate wines or cooler climate grapes that are grown. Typically, things like a Riesling grape, which grows in a colder climate, or a cooler Pinot Noir. And when you get into your higher temperature grape varietals, you'll find that the acid tends to get lower because the fruit, before it gets picked, ripens a bit more on the vine. And so you get higher sugars that come into the grape. So as that fruit develops, the development of the fruit is going to really start to come through. And let's go ahead and get this poured. Not great pouring left-handed, so give me a second. I love that sound. I love the sound of wine going in a glass, especially the first pour when the bottles are really starting to breathe and open up. And so what I'm going to do is just give this a swirl. Part of having that nice big glass is getting a lot of air exposure to the wine in the glass. What's happening when you put the wine in the bottle and cork it is the idea is to stop its exposure to air, because once wine starts to oxidize, it actually will over time turn into vinegar. And if you've ever drank vinegar straight, it's not a pleasant thing, right? So we want to protect that wine. We want to keep it from hitting air. But once it does hit the air, it will survive quite a bit. And again, how long depends on the structure of the wine. So the more structure it has, the more it can be exposed to air and start to change and evolve into what the fruit is going to showcase from either the vintage or the soil or the site that it was picked from. So let's taste this. I do love Dunham. So acid, right? Higher acid. How do you test for acid? It's pretty simple. If you can imagine sucking on a lemon, what happens in your mouth? You get all the saliva that starts to kick out of your glands, kind of toward the back of your tongue. And so the more saliva you feel from that, or the faster it starts to kick out, the higher the acid is in the wine. When you have higher acid in a wine, it's going to give a little bit more body to that wine, and it's going to be something that will help that wine age a little bit more over its lifetime. Really, tasting for acid is the first step. The second thing you want to taste for is the body. So we have light, medium, and full-bodied, and really that's the mouthfeel of the wine. So are we getting, something that's really heavy on our tongue? It feels like it's got a lot of bold flavors hitting you in the face. And those flavors can be fruit-forward flavors, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, when we talk about red wine, or they can be earthy flavors. So mushroom, earth, kind of think about forest floor. This is the way they describe it. I didn't come up with it, but forest floor, horse blanket, being in that barnyard, those earthy flavors that are going to come through, tobacco, spice, things like that, would be more of your earthy flavors. So heavy, full-bodied wines are going to have a lot of that flavor up front. A lighter bodied wine or a medium bodied wine like a Pinot Noir is going to really kind of be a little bit lighter and brighter. It's going to have more of those medium fruits, maybe some cherry notes in it. Very, very famous Pinot Noir, famous for cherry. But depending if it's a warm weather Pinot or a cool weather Pinot, the warm weather, you're going to get a little bit more of that fruit forward. And the cooler weather Pinot, you're going to get a little bit more of that earthiness to it, right? What that body and that acid are going to do are going to affect how you pair it with food. When you talk about high acid can cut through really heavy meals, richness in a meal. So if there's a lot of butter and there's a lot of body in the food that you're eating, a high acid wine can cut through that. If what you're eating is a little bit softer, then you want something that's more medium acid, medium body, and so that it doesn't overpower the food. But when you have really strong, powerful food, you can have strong acid. When you have more rounded out foods that are softer, you want to have more medium acid, medium body. The last thing that I was talking about was tannin. So when we talk about tannin is the drying factor that you feel on your tongue. So when you take a sip of wine, So when you take a sip of wine, first of all, you want to swirl it around your mouth, let it hit all the different areas of your tongue, get around your palate, coat your palate, right? And then you've heard me do that little slurp. That's just a way to get some air into the wine. If you kind of just pull some air in between your lips as you're drinking it, But that feeling on your tongue, if your tongue feels really dry after you do all of that, that would be a wine that has high tannin to it. If it doesn't feel as dry, you'd have low tannin. And what tannin is going to represent is an ageability to the wine as well. So when we talk about real structure, acid and tannin, high acid and high tannin, you're typically going to get a wine that will age for a very long time. The tannin comes all from the skins. When they crush the grapes, when they harvest the grapes and then they pick all the stems out and then crush them to get the juice out, they let all that juice sit on the skins. And part of the process of making wine, you actually have two different processes. You have what's called pump over. So they'll press it all the juice sinks to the bottom, the skins float to the top, and then they'll actually pump the juice from the bottom of the tank over the skins. And they call that pump over. So they're trying to increase skin contact with the juice of the grape to get those tannins out of the skin. The other method would be called what they call punch down. And just like it sounds, instead of pumping the juice over, they're now taking a punch and pushing down the skins. So they call that a punch down. Again, same concept is to increase the skin contact to try to get all that tannin out of the skin into the wine. And the longer it sits on the skins, the darker the wine is going to get. So if you drink a wine like rosé, that might have skin contact for anywhere from only a couple of hours to maybe a day or two. And that's why the wine is so much lighter and so much brighter. You can have rosé of many different grapes, but the way you get the rosé color is to limit the skin contact with the wine. And that's why rosés typically won't age as long, because you're not getting that tannin into the wine. So those three elements, right? Acid, body, tannin, and then the process of how they're getting that out of the skin and what the grape was to begin with, all affect the ageability of your wine. And of course, the flavor profile you're going to get with it as well. So we have Thanksgiving coming up tomorrow, right? And most of us will have turkey and stuffing and gravy, probably some vegetable casseroles, whether that's mashed sweet potatoes. One of my favorites, the green bean casserole. I love the crispy onions on top and the cream of mushroom soup that just goes into it. Such a simple way to put things together, but really flavorful, really tasty, and really great pairing with Pinot Noir. So the Pinot Noir is a medium body, medium acid. It won't necessarily overpower the turkey, which the meat of the turkey and the poultry, not quite as harsh as a steak or a roast that you might have at other holidays. Pinot Noir becomes one of the perfect pairings for a Thanksgiving dinner. The Pinot Noir I happened to open from Dunham, this was 2021, so not very old, about 4 years old. And the age on the wine, in case you're not familiar, is the year the grapes were picked. So this probably didn't find its way into a bottle till probably closer to 2023. But in 2021, they would have picked the grapes. And that is going to give me characteristics of what was occurring in 2021. What was the temperature like? Were the sugars a little bit higher in the grapes, so therefore the acid's a little bit lower? Is there more sweetness in the wine? If the sweetness is gone because the alcohol is created when the yeast eats the sugar, so the higher the sugar, the more there is for the alcohol or for the yeast to eat, and it produces higher alcohol. So what is the alcohol level of the wine? That will tell you a story about the growing season of when that wine or when those grapes were grown. But Three Hills comes from one of the vineyards that ironically has three hills to it. And Dunham does two expressions of what they call whole cluster fermentation. So rather than actually destemming and deseeding the grapes, they leave the stems and the seeds on when they crush the grapes. And that creates a little bit more earthiness to the end product of the wine that goes in the bottle. Probably get a little bit more ageability from it as well, but you will find that that is much more of a Burgundian flavor profile or an old world. Old world tends to be more earth forward than fruit forward, where New World tends to be more fruit forward versus earthy. And so you get a much more old world style that's going to go really well with things like I was talking about, that cream of mushroom in the green beans and the earthy sweet potatoes that came out of the ground, and that turkey and gravy and stuffing that's all going to go well together. Perfect pairing for Thanksgiving. Pinot Noir, if you want to go with a white wine, a really nice white wine that would go well is a Riesling. really high in acid, really bright, crisp, and clear in its flavor profile, and it will pair really well with the other things you're finding on that Thanksgiving table. So I hope this gave you a little bit more insight into how to kind of think about wine from some of the basics. Remember, you are looking for acid, you're looking for the body or the mouthfeel of the wine, and then you're looking for tannin. And high tannin is going to typically give you more of that sediment in the bottle. So be careful that we don't pour that into the glass, or it will taste very, very bitter and grainy. And that's not going to be an enjoyable texture to add to your wine. So if you are pouring something a little bit heavier for Thanksgiving out of that high-shouldered bottle, make sure you pour gently and slowly. And as you get to the bottom of what's in that wine bottle, just pour really slowly and maybe turn that bottle a little bit as you pour to catch the sediment in the bottle. The other way you could avoid that is to decant the wine, and you could pour it through a screen or a sieve to catch any of that sediment as well. Or if you're very good at decanting, you could just slowly pour into the decanter. Most of it will get caught in the bottle. And then as you pour out of the decanter, if anything did make its way in there, you would pour again slowly out of there. We decant wine because we want to expose it to the air, let it breathe and open up and start to change. Typically, you're going to decant your heavier wines like your Cabernets, your Merlots, your Cab Francs. Typically, a Pinot Noir doesn't need to be decanted unless it was quite old. And then you would maybe want to decant it for maybe an hour or so. But a really heavy Cab, you could decant for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours even, depending on the structure of the wine, as we've talked about. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Leave me something in the comments about what you're drinking with your Thanksgiving dinner. Hopefully, if you are looking at pairing something, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Be happy to do some research or get you some answers. Cheers to everybody. I'm thankful, as always, for the time you choose to spend with me, learning and talking about the gentlemanly things here on the show. That's not about how to be a gentleman, but the art of living like one. And certainly the first step in learning is participating, especially when it comes to drinking wine or whiskey. So give it a try. Remember, what you taste is what you taste, and what they taste is what they taste. Everybody's right. It's one of the beautiful things about this hobby that we get to participate in. So enjoy your Thanksgiving, your time with your family, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Gentlemanly Things. If you liked this episode, please go ahead and subscribe and share and comment. We want to spread the gospel far and wide. Cheers to you. We'll see you next week.